Hey there, members of the Night Crew, and folks who just love horror. Welcome to the Night Crew podcast, where shadows breathe and monsters listen. This is the podcast where we get cozy with the creepy, the frightening, and the just plain undead. I'm your host, Brad Ricks. And before we jump into episode 1 of this brand new series, let's talk some quick updates. Signed books and merch are over at bradricks.com. Don't forget Dead Mountain comes out in October. Go pre-order it now. Also, join my Facebook group, Brad Ricks' Book Crypt, and become a crypt dweller. It's a fun place to share horror recommendations, rave about my books, and anything else horror related you like to talk about. Alright, let's get started. It's a new series time. So, let's talk about what we're actually going to be doing here for the next 6 episodes. We aren't talking creatures, but objects. Cursed objects, to be exact. Not cursed places, although that does sound fun. But objects. Things you could, in theory, pick up and hold in your hand. Assuming you have considerably less sense than I do. Now, here's the question to think about during this entire series. So, I want to ask it before we start episode 1. Before we get into a single diamond, millions of objects have had bad things happen around them. Millions of rings have been on the fingers of people who died badly. Millions of chairs have been set in by people who never stood up again. That's a word I can't say. Statistically, there you go. That's just what happens when an object exists for a couple hundred years and passes through a couple hundred hands. Somebody dies near almost everything eventually. So, why do a tiny handful of objects get, singled out? Why does one diamond become the Hope Diamond, cursed, famous, insured for a small fortune, and stared at by 3 million visitors a year? While some other diamonds that's passed through an equally bloody chain of ownership is just, a diamond in a drawer somewhere. That's something to keep in mind throughout this whole series. It's not really about whether objects can be cursed. It's about how we decide which ones get to be. Tonight, we're doing 6 of the most famous cursed objects on Earth. The ones you've probably already heard of, even if you've never heard the details. Consider this the greatest hits album. 6 objects, 6 sections. Let's go one at a time. All right, first up, the one everybody already knows the name of, even if they couldn't tell you why. The Hope Diamond. So the story starts in 1653 with a French gem merchant named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. You guys know how I am with pronunciations, so if you're listening and you're French, sorry, I know I butchered that. Now, he traveled to the Golconda Sultanate in India and came back with a rough, triangular blue diamond weighing about 115 carats. Where exactly he got it, nobody actually knows. He might have bought it. He might have talked someone out of it. The popular legend, and this is legend, not documentation, says he pried it out of the eye socket of a statue of the Hindu goddess Sita, and that the temple priests cursed whoever carried it out of India. Now, it's a great story. It's also, like I said, completely undocumented. Tavernier himself never wrote it, and it doesn't show up until much later, tacked on after the fact. What we do know for certain is that he sold the stone to King Louis XIV of France, who in 1673 had it recut down to about 69 carats and nicknamed it the French Blue. Now, here's where the legend tries to start building some momentum. Louis XIV died of gangrene, which, sure, he was 76 years old, which was ancient for the era. So I'm not sure gangrene needs a curse to explain it. More interesting is what happened generations later. The French blue passed down through the royal treasury and ended up, by tradition, associated with King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, both of whom, of course, were executed during the French Revolution. That detail gets repeated constantly. Cursed diamond beheaded king and queen. Except the diamond wasn't actually stolen from the crown jewels until 1792, during the chaos of the revolution itself, well after the political machinery that would kill them both was already in motion. The diamond didn't cause the French Revolution. It was just sitting in a vault while several million furious French citizens caused it themselves. The stone vanishes for about 20 years after that, which, by the way, is kind of a classic move for anything that wants a mysterious origin story. And then it resurfaces in London around 1812, recut smaller still, closer to the 45-carat stone we know today. It eventually gets purchased by a wealthy London banker named Henry Philip Hope. And that's where the name we use now actually comes from. It's not because of a curse or a dream. It's just some dude's last name. The diamond bounces through the Hope family and a couple of subsequent owners before landing in 1911 in front of Pierre Cartier. Yes, that Cartier, who was trying to sell it to an American mining heiress named Evelyn Walsh McLean. And here's a detail I kind of truly love, because it's one of the only points in this entire episode where we can catch the curse machine actually being built in real time by a named individual for a documented financial motive. McLean had already turned the diamond down once. It wasn't to her taste. So Cartier went back and reworked his pitch, this time leaning hard into the stone's supposedly tragic blood-soaked history, its parade of ruined former owners, its reputation as an object no one could hold on to, at least safely. According to multiple biographers of the Cartier family, he essentially invented, or at a minimum heavily embellished, a cursed narrative because he understood something very modern about his customers. So Evelyn collected misfortune-proof heirlooms the way other people like to collect stamps. She already owned another supposedly cursed jewel, the Star of the East. So telling her a stone was dangerous wasn't a deterrent. It was the sales pitch. And it worked. She bought the Hope Diamond in 1912, and in a gesture that tells you she took the legend at least half seriously, she had a priest bless it before she ever wore it. And then, over the following decades, her life actually did fall apart. Her 9-year-old son, Vincent, was killed in a car accident. Her daughter died of a drug overdose at 25. Her husband, Ned, developed a severe mental illness, left her for another woman, and eventually died in a psychiatric hospital. She was forced to sell her family's newspaper, the Washington Post, to cover debts. She died in 1947 at 60 of pneumonia, owing money. Every one of those tragedies is real, and every one of them is genuinely awful, and every one of them is also, unfortunately, the ordinary result of a long, difficult life among a family with money, addiction, and mental illness in the first half of the 20th century. Car accidents happen before the Hope Diamond, and they'll happen after its one-day dust. What the curse narrative does, what Pierre Cartier understood better than almost anyone in this whole story, is take real, ordinary human tragedy and give it a villain. Something you can point to. Something that lets you say, this happened to me, instead of this just happened. One of those explanations gives us the universe. It gives the universe an intention. The other one doesn't. And that's so much harder to sit with for 36 years. The diamond itself, it's doing fine. For the record, it's been sitting quietly at the Smithsonian since 1958, having caused, as far as anyone can tell, exactly 0 problems for the Smithsonian. All right. Next. And this one's got a curse legend that's almost more interesting than the stone, because we can watch this one get built too. just by an institution this time instead of a salesperson. I'm talking about the Koh-i-Noor. The first solid historical record of the diamond puts it on the Mughal peacock throne in Delhi in the 1740s, documented by a historian named Muhammad Kazim Marvi. In 1731, the Persian ruler Nadir Shah invaded Delhi and looted the throne, diamond and all. And it's supposedly Nadir Shah who gave the stone its name, Koh-i-Noor, Mountain of Light, upon first seeing it. Now, after Nadir Shah was assassinated in 1747, the diamond moved to Ahmad Shah Durrani in Afghanistan. And by 1813, it had come into the hands of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the powerful founder of the Sikh Empire in Punjab. Ranjit Singh died in 1839. A decade of political chaos in the Sikh Empire followed, and by 1849, after the British East India Company defeated the Sikhs in the Second Anglo-Sikh War, the Treaty of Lahore forced the surrender of the diamond, taken specifically from the Ranjit Singh's son and successor, Maharaja Duleep Singh, who was 10 years old at the time. It was presented to Queen Victoria that same year. The British public got their first look at it during the Great Exhibition of 1851, and according to contemporary accounts, they were underwhelmed. The diamond's traditional Mughal-style cut didn't throw off the kind of brilliant sparkle Victorian audiences expected from modern European cutting. So Prince Albert commissioned the royal jewelers Gerard and Company to recut it, and in 1852, over 38 days, they ground it down from 186 old carats to about 105.6 modern carats, reshaping it entirely into an oval, brilliant cut. It's genuinely a controversial move historically. Some call it a technical improvement. Others call it the deliberate erasure of the stone's Mughal and South Asian heritage in favor of a European aesthetic. Either way, it's the version that's set in the British crown jewels ever since. Now, the curse. The legend says whoever owns this diamond will own the world, but will also know all its misfortunes. Safe only for God or for a woman to wear. It sounds like something whispered in a Mughal court centuries ago. Historians have gone looking for it in pre-British Indian, Persian, and Afghan sources, and it simply is not there. It appears, as far as anyone can trace it, to be a Victorian invention, likely originating from sensationalist coverage in the Delhi Gazette that was then picked up and amplified by the Illustrated London News. Now, here's what makes it such an effective invented curse. It explains a pattern that was already true by the time anyone was repeating it. Since 1849, the diamond has only ever been worn by queens and queen consorts, never by a reigning king. So the curse isn't predicting anything. It's narrating something that already happened. And then we're kind of calling it prophecy after the fact. Now, we're going to see this trick again in this series, by the way. The curse kind of gets written after a pattern, not before it. So it's not like you say, this is the curse that's going to happen if you have this diamond, and then you have the artifact and suddenly the curse happens. No, it's bad things happen. They happen to be holding this. Now we're going to call it a curse. And, the funny thing is, conveniently, everybody kind of forgets which came first, the curse or the pattern. It's also worth noting that the Koh-i-Noor is right now at the center of a very real, entirely non-supernatural international dispute. India, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan have all formally requested its return from Britain at different points, each with a competing historical claim. Turns out, you really don't need a curse for a diamond seized from a 10-year-old boy during a colonial war to cause ongoing trouble. The regular kind of trouble works just fine on its own. All right, shifting gears away from some jewelry, we're going to talk about the big one, the one that basically invented curse as a media genre and taught every tabloid editor since exactly how to run this play. November 1922. British archaeologist Howard Carter, funded for years by his patron, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, finally finds the sealed tomb of the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings. Remarkably, almost completely intact, which practically never happens with Egyptian tombs after 3,000 years of looting. It is one of the greatest archaeological finds in history. And then, about 2 months after the tomb is opened, Lord Carnarvon is dead. Now, the actual cause is kind of mundane and awful in a very ordinary human way. He nicked a mosquito bite while shaving. The wound got infected. The infection turned into blood poisoning, and he died in a Cairo hotel in April of 1923. No hieroglyphic curse required, but the press did not care about mundane. Newspapers worldwide ran with the idea that the tomb carried a curse against anyone who disturbed the pharaoh's rest. And the story had exactly the right ingredients to become a global sensation. Ancient Egypt, a sudden death, ominous timing, and a genuinely spooky discovery to hang it all on. Now, 2 details got attached almost immediately and have been repeated for a century since. And I want to run both of them down for you because they're both, as far as the historical record goes, kind of false. First, the story that when Carnarvon died in Cairo, his 3-legged fox terrier back home in England, a dog named Susie, let out a mournful howl and dropped dead at the exact same moment. It's a wonderful, eerie image. It also doesn't hold up. By most contemporary accounts, Susie actually died about 4 hours after her master, not simultaneously, which is a much less spooky coincidence and a much more plausible one for an old dog whose owner happened to die around the same general time. Second, the story that Carter came home from the dig one day to find a cobra, the symbol of Egyptian royalty, had gotten into his canary's cage and eaten the bird whole on the very day the tomb was opened as a kind of pharaonic warning shot. Except Carter's own meticulous records never mention it. No contemporary source corroborates it. And by several accounts, he'd actually given his canary to a friend, Minnie Burton, to look around that time, to look after around that time. So the fateful meeting with the cobra likely never happened at all. Now, here's a detail that should have killed the whole curse story instantly and somehow didn't. Howard Carter, the man who actually excavated the tomb, who spent more time in that burial chamber than any other living person, who physically touched the sarcophagus and cataloged the boy king's own possessions, well, he lived another 16 years after the discovery and died in 1939 at 64 of lymphoma. If anyone should have been cursed, narratively, it's the guy who did the actual digging. Instead, he just didn't die. For a decade and a half, the universe apparently never got the memo about who the main character was supposed to be. And it's not just Carter. In 2002, researchers published a study in the British Medical Journal that statistically compared the lifespans of people documented as having been present at the tomb's opening or otherwise exposed to it against a comparable control group of Westerners in Egypt at the time who weren't. The finding? No statistically significant difference in mortality at all. The curse doesn't survive contact with actual epidemiology. Carter himself, for what it's worth, never once mentioned a curse in his own extensive diaries. He didn't believe it, didn't promote it, and by most accounts, found the entire media circus around it fairly exhausting to live through. The Curse of the Pharaohs is, more than almost anything else in this episode, a story about what happens when you hand the international press one genuinely eerie coincidence, a patron's death 2 months after historic discovery, and then just let them run. Now, Having visited Egypt myself, there is a very real Tut's revenge, also known as Pharaoh's revenge, also known as traveler's diarrhea. If you've been to Mexico, it's called Montezuma's revenge there. Tut's revenge is real and will tear your butt up. Take it from me. All right. Now, this next one is a little different from the rest. The Basano Vase. You've maybe heard this one. Italian vase allegedly crafted centuries ago as a wedding gift for a young bride who died mysteriously on her own wedding night while clutching it. It resurfaces decades later with a note supposedly tucked inside reading, "Beware, this vase brings death." It then proceeds to kill off a string of subsequent owners, a pharmacist, a doctor, an archaeologist, each one dying shortly after taking possession. I looked into this one hard because it's one of the most repeated cursed object stories on the internet, showing up on a list after list of the world's deadliest artifacts. And here's what I found. Diddly squat. No names in the story hold up to any kind of check. No dates hold up. No specific Italian village is ever consistently named. Nobody has ever produced a photograph of the actual vase. There's no auction record, no museum accession record, no newspaper obituary for a single one of these supposedly cursed owners. The story has all the surface specificity of something true. A village, a bride, a warning note, and none of the actual verification that a true story leaves behind. Now, what I think happened here is fairly simple. Somebody, probably fairly recently and probably online, wrote an extremely well-constructed piece of creepypasta, gave it just enough period texture to feel old and folkloric, and the internet did what the internet reliably does with a good story. It said, "I don't care where it came from." I'm including it in this episode anyway, deliberately, because I think it's a genuinely useful case study for this whole series. It shows you what a cursed object story looks like when it's built entirely from scratch with zero raw material underneath it. No real vase required, no real deaths required, just a good shape, a couple of confident specific sounding details, and a willing audience. Now, from a vase that most likely never existed to one you can actually go look at yourself right now in a drawer in London. The Delhi Purple Sapphire. First correction, it's not a sapphire at all. It's an amethyst, a purple variety of quartz. But it has maybe the best documented curse story in this entire episode, because the man most associated with it wrote almost all of it down himself in his own hand. And that account still exists. The stone was reportedly looted from a shrine to the Hindu god Indra in India during the extreme violence of the 1857 rebellion against British colonial rule, taken by a Bengal cavalry officer named Colonel W. Ferris. According to family accounts, almost as soon as Ferris returned to England, his finances began collapsing, dragging his family toward ruin. And when he lent the stone to a friend of the family, that friend inexplicably committed suicide. Ferris blamed the gem. By 1890, the stone had passed to a man named Edward Heron Allen, and Heron Allen is genuinely one of the most interesting figures in this whole episode. He was not a gullible mark. He was a polymath, a trained scientist, a serious scholar of violin making, a writer who dabbled in early science fiction. In fact, he later wrote a short story called The Purple Sapphire, fiction directly inspired by his own cursed stone. By his own description, he considered himself a rational man, and yet he became convinced almost immediately that the gem was cursed, blaming it for a cascade of misfortunes both in his own life and in the lives of friends he lent it to. In 1902, he reluctantly loaned it to one friend who was almost instantly beset by a run of bad luck and returned it as fast as he could. Another time, he passed it to a singer, and according to the account, she lost her voice not long after receiving it. Eventually, in frustration, Heron Allen threw the stone into Regent's Canal in London, trying to be rid of it for good. I love this part of the story, by the way. Months later, according to the story, It was dredged up by a dredging company, sold to a jeweler who, in an almost absurd coincidence, recognized it immediately as the exact stone he had once mounted into a ring for Heron Allen and returned it to him. The dude chunked it into a canal, and it came back to him. Welcome, cursed object. I love this story. At that point, Heron Allen gave up trying to destroy it and instead tried to contain it. He had it bound in a silver ring shaped like a double-headed snake, added 2 amethyst scarab beetles, engraved it with symbols of the zodiac, sealed it inside 7 nested boxes, and locked the whole assembly in his bank vault with strict written instructions that it not be opened until 3 years after his death. Now, he died in 1943. His daughter, by most accounts a considerably more sensible person than her father on this particular subject, opened the box sooner than instructed and shipped the whole thing straight to the Natural History Museum in London, rather than keep it in the family home for even one more night. In his own surviving letter, still archived alongside the stone today, Heron Allen called it trebly accursed and stained with blood, and instructed whoever eventually received it to throw it into the sea. Nobody ever has. It just sits in a museum drawer in London, mostly ignored by the public, occasionally requested by researchers who are usually more interested in reading the letter than actually looking at the gem. Now, the last one for this episode, the Black Orlov, also known as the Eye of Brahma. A black diamond, 67.5 carats in its current form, said to have originally been a much larger 195 carat uncut stone that sat as one of the eyes in a statue of the Hindu god Brahma in a temple in India, before a Jesuit monk allegedly stole it sometime in the 1800s. I'm going to pause for a moment and ask that we just, in general, can we just stop stealing diamonds out of Hindu statues? I mean, for the love. The cursed legend here centers on 3 specific suicides. In 1932, a diamond dealer named J.W. Paris reportedly brought the stone to New York and then jumped to his death from a skyscraper. Then, according to the legend, 2 Russian noblewomen, Princess Nadia Orlov and Princess Leonila Galetsyn-Brontinsky, if you're Russian, I apologize, both jumped from buildings in Rome within months of each other in 1947, each having owned the stone at some point. That's the legend as it gets repeated. Here's the problem with it. When researchers actually went digging for documentation on those 2 princesses' deaths, the paper trail falls apart entirely. Historical records indicate Princess Leonila actually died in Switzerland in 1918. Nearly 30 years before she was supposedly leaping from a Roman rooftop in 1947. Which is an impressive trick for a woman who'd already been dead for 3 decades, and a pretty clear sign that somebody at some point built a tiny little dramatic 3-act tragedy without really checking whether the 3rd act's leading lady was still around to star in it. Here's what actually happened to the stone, historically, as best it can be documented. Sometime in the 1950s, a diamond dealer named Charles F. Winson had the original 195 carat rough stone recut and divided into 3 separate smaller stones, 67.5 carats worth in the piece we now call the Black Orlov, with the other 2 pieces going elsewhere. Winson reportedly did this specifically because he believed cutting the stone would break whatever curse it carried. Whether or not that worked depends entirely on your priors going into this episode. Winson appears to be the first ownership of the stone that can actually be documented with real paperwork. It changed hands a few times over the following decades, went up for auction more than once, and in 2004 was purchased by a diamond dealer named Dennis Pedamezas, who had it reset into a striking platinum necklace surrounded by 108 smaller white diamonds. It's believed today to be in a private collection with the current owner's identity kept confidential, which, for a supposedly cursed diamond, is a remarkably normal, boring, security-conscious way for an expensive object to spend its retirement. All right, so 6 objects. A diamond whose curse was, at least in significant part, deliberately manufactured by a jeweler trying to close a sale. A stolen diamond wearing a curse invented by a Victorian newspaperman after the fact to explain a pattern that was already true. A tomb whose curse spared the man who actually should have been its first target, and that a peer-reviewed statistical study found no evidence for at all. A vase that, as far as anyone can actually prove, never physically existed in the first place. A quartz stone, honestly meticulously documented by a genuine scientist who talked himself into believing it anyway, in his own handwriting, which still survives. And a diamond with a body count partly built on a woman who'd already been dead for decades when she supposedly died a second, more dramatic death. Every single one of these had some real machinery underneath the myth. A real theft, a real death, a real financial motive, a real grieving family. And in every single case, humans took that raw material and built something with a plot, a villain, and a moral. We are, it turns out, almost incapable of leaving a good tragedy just sitting there as senseless. We have to reach for the nearest shiny object in the room and say, "It was you." This is a deeply, deeply human thing to do. And I don't think it's going away. And honestly, one episode into caring about this stuff, I'm not sure I even want it to. So that's kind of the greatest hits. Next time, we're leaving the display cases behind and we're going somewhere a little more unsettling. Objects that don't just carry bad luck around with them, but seem to be looking back at you. Oh yeah, we're talking dolls. Boxes with something inside that maybe shouldn't have been let out. That one's going to be a fun one to record, and I'm going to make sure I'm going to do it with the lights on. All right, well, that's it for the Night Crew podcast and the first episode of our series on cursed objects. I've got 6 episodes mapped out, each with their own theme. It's not creatures like normal, but it's fun to step away from the creatures for a moment and turn our attention to something we can hold in our hand that doesn't just rip us to shreds. Couple last minute reminders before I let you go. Signed books and merch are at bradricks.com. Dead Mountain is on pre-order coming out October 13th. And catch me on Facebook in the group Brad Ricks' Book Crypt. Hey, and always the best thing you can do for this show, just share an episode with somebody. I mean, it's for fun. I'm Brad Ricks, reminding you to stay out of graveyards after dark, question people who don't show up in mirrors, and think twice before you buy a suspiciously cheap diamond that may or may not have been stolen from a Hindu statue. Until next time, keep your curtains drawn, your sense of humor sharp, and your blood inside your body. Thanks for listening.